It's here, the world's most insane reloading press shootout. Gavin Gear here from UltimateReloader.com. This has been the biggest project that I've ever taken on because in this video, I'm gonna show you and I'm gonna compare 14 different single stage reloading presses. Couple notes before we get started. First, I'd like to invite you to like and subscribe. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe with notifications because I've got more detailed sort of scientific stories coming up like this. Okay, here's how it's gonna work. For each of these presses, I'm gonna go alphabetically by manufacturer. I'm gonna take each press off of the custom rack that I built back here, which is based on the inline fabrication wall rack system, which is great. All these presses have the quick change ultra mount inline fabrication plates on them so that I can quickly change them out. So each press gets center stage. I'm going to start with the high level information and metrics about the press. What's the materials of construction? What's the country of origin? What's a high level, specifications list and features breakdown? Then I will transition to measured performance criteria for each of these presses. So with regard to performance criteria, I looked at two things. I looked at the press itself and I looked at the quality of the ammunition produced by the press. And with regard to the press, I started with the press ram to frame fit. I was specifically looking at slop. And for a conventional single stage press, that meant installing some custom instrumentation that I designed and I built on the Precision Matthews lathe. And what I would basically do is raise the ram to the top of the stroke, press in and out, wobbling it, and press side to side and look at the total indicator reading up where the ogive of a 6.5 Creedmoor bullet would be. For presses without a conventional ram that this test can be performed on, I would take a look at the carriage where the shell holder sits for presses like this Forster Co-Ax, and then on presses like the RCBS Summit, it's actually got a carriage that comes down with the die on it. I looked at the precision of the fit between that carriage and the ram itself. So you can't 100% compare these numbers, but it does give you a good comparison of the relative level of precision between the presses. Then I took measurements with this Reed Instruments SD6100 force gauge, pulling on the press handle through the entire stroke, sizing 6.5 Creedmoor cases and withdrawing them as well. So the full cycle, I did at least 2 for each press, and I used the same brass and the same lube, Imperial case sizing wax. This gives you an idea of the relative amount of leverage on each press and the dynamics of how the linkage is engineered. Yes, it will be sped up when you do it at full speed, but in a relative sense, you can take these graphs and compare them to get a good idea of how the presses respond and how they work. So then it was time to load some dummy cartridges. And these dummy cartridges, I loaded 5 for each, were all loaded using the same brass. Hornady once fired 6.5 Creedmoor, fired them in my Ruger Precision Rifle. They've all been fired in the same chamber. And that was critical because I wanted to work the brass and I wanted to take measurements after that brass was worked because that's a real world scenario. And I used the 6.5 Creedmoor Hornady brass because not only was it all fired in the same rifle, but when I checked with my eye gauging ball micrometer, the consistency of the neck thickness was within about 2/10,000ths of an inch. So I would size 5 cases very carefully and consistently and then seat 5 bullets. I used Hornady 123 grain AMAX bullets. I got really good numbers with this with the Reading competition seater die. The sizer that I used was the Forster full length 6.5 Creedmoor die. This gives very good results itself as well, and it's very well made, so I thought that would be a good component to use for the tests. So after I had 5 cartridges, I would take readings. I've got the eye gauging Smart Wireless Origin calipers. These have Bluetooth, and I would use the Hornady comparator kits for headspace and for bullet seating depth. The bullet seating depth comparator goes off of the ogive of the bullet, and the headspace comparator kit goes off of the datum line on the shoulder. And since these have Bluetooth, I was able to, on my Windows laptop, send it straight to Excel, and that saved quite a bit of time. Very carefully using the same amount of force and spinning the case to make sure that the shoulder and bullet were getting good consistent readings, and then hit the button to send it to Excel. So we've got base to shoulder and base to ogive measurements there. I would then take the cartridges over to the metal lathe, where I had very carefully chucked up an L.E. Wilson case holder. This is the same kind of case holder that's used in their trimmer. And my thinking here was, I want to simulate what happens when a cartridge is chambered in the rifle. What are the critical aspects as the cartridge is being shot? So I dialed in the concentricity to 2/10,000ths of an inch at the exit and at the entrance, and in that way got it very close to perfectly collinear with the spindle of the lathe. So as this cartridge is being revolved, I can then take an indicator and take readings for case neck concentricity with the body of the case, which is a critical factor, and then also bullet run out. I took those measurements at the ogive and then towards the tip as well. And I used an indicator that reads in half thousandths, so I got a good level of precision with that as well. I put all the data into Excel and I applied some formulas. I'll include details on that in the full article write-up. So that's an overview of my test methodology. Used quite a bit of instruments. I used a precision packing scale to measure the weight of the presses, and lots of data to look at. So let's walk through each of the presses alphabetically, starting with the Forster Co-Ax. The Forster Co-Ax, one of the most talked about presses. This actually started out as the Bonanza Co-Ax in the late 60s, and in the 1980s, Forster bought the rights to this press design. And since then, they've made very slight improvements. It was a great design, but they're always looking for ways to make the press that much better. An example, I was talking with Bob Ruck from Forster about their priming system and the fingers that hold the case rim, and they were making slight changes to that to make it work just a little bit better with today's popular cartridges. It's made in the USA, cast iron construction. It's called the coax because there's two axes, the axis of the die and the axis of the cartridge, and they both have a bit of self-aligning capability or float. The dies are held by the die lock ring. You can either use regular lock rings, or Forster suggests that you use their optimized, slightly oversized lock rings that fit perfectly in there. But I found the regular lock rings to work good. The die therefore has some float to it. The way that the integrated proprietary universal shell holder works has a little bit of float to it. You can see the jaws come in together. There's a small size and a large size. And the way that the shell holder works, the way that the die retention works, means that both have a little bit of self-alignment capability or float, and the axis of the die and the axis of the cartridge are therefore able to be coaxial. That's where that name comes from. With a 3.97-inch usable frame opening, this has got a generous capacity, and I would call this a C-frame hybrid design in terms of the press frame itself. It's got an integral frame with a backbone, but there's the twin guide rods that guide the carriage up and down. And another really notable thing about the Forster Co-Ax is the leverage. You can tell right away when you start using this press, it's got better than average leverage. And in fact, it's got the best leverage of any press tested in this shootout. The average peak sizing force for 6.5 Creedmoor, and I'll show you the graph there, was about 17.5 pounds. Some of these presses were up towards 50 pounds. So that gives you an idea of how optimized this press design is. There's going to be a distinction between cam over designs where the shell holder comes up and then it goes slightly down as the linkage cams over, versus hard stop. Hard stop would be either where there's a physical stop to the linkage, or in the case of this press, the linkage comes up pretty much perfectly straight. So basically, the shell holder is going to come up and stop. It's not going to go back down, so it's almost cam over, but not. This press has a great blend of usability, features, and precision, and I think that's why it's so popular. And I suppose it's appropriate that the Frankfort Arsenal Empress is next alphabetically, because this press is frequently compared to the Forster Co-Ax. They're both coaxial in design. In other words, they can both self-align the die and the cartridge because of the way the presses are designed, but that's one of the only similarities. This press is made in China. It's got an MSRP of $299. Typical street price is $249. So it comes in street price about $100 less than the Forster Co-Ax. But really there's quite a bit different here. First, it has a completely different frame design. There is really no central cast iron frame on this press. It is cast iron construction, but these large guide rods really are what provides support for the upper area where the die block is. It uses proprietary Frankfort Arsenal die blocks. These come in sets of 3, and they come with a die case so that your die blocks are all together and organized, and the die blocks do float in the press, which provides part of that coaxial alignment. The shell holder is also kind of a unique situation here. You've got rotary plates under each side of where the shell holder grabs the cartridge, and each has 4 different settings: small, large, 223, and 308. So there's sizes all the way from 223 and other small cartridges even smaller than 223, all the way up to 338 Lapua. That's another unique differentiator on this press, is the 5-inch usable frame opening, which is the largest of any of the presses compared here. It also has an on-press light, which is another differentiator. And overall, the quality and precision of the ammunition produced by the Empress was similar to the Forster Co-Ax in the same general category. So each press is a little bit different. They share kind of the general overall shape and look. Another differentiator with this press compared to all of the other presses is that you can toggle these linkage plates and flip them around, and that switches between a hard stop and a cam over action for the carriage. So depending on your preferences and depending on what your goals are, you can actually switch between the two. So that's the Frankfort Arsenal Empress. On to Hornady, starting with the Hornady Lock and Load Classic. This is a straight up O-frame press, cast aluminum construction for the frame. It does have the lock and load bushing system integrated, which I really like because you can easily change out dies. I will note that the bushing is removable on this press, which I like because I actually have a story back in the archives of calibrating the die height on this press with my lock and load AP Progressive. I can swap dies back and forth, which is pretty cool. It has an integrated priming system via this lever, and there's even an optional tube where you can automatically charge the lever. The lever is easily removable, and then it doesn't get in the way as much if you're not doing on-press priming. It's got the integrated primer catcher bucket there. It's got a lot of great features. 3.75-inch usable frame opening, and basically, I think what's notable about this press is the price point. It comes in at about $147 street price, and the fact that it has the bushing system integrated. And here's Hornady's other single stage, the Lock and Load Iron, where the Lock and Load Classic weighs in at 8.73 pounds. This Lock and Load iron is massive. It comes in at 25 pounds. When you pick this thing up, you can feel that massive USA casting. Both presses made in the USA, both use the lock and load bushing system. That's kind of where the similarities end. This press is unique in that it's the only press in this entire collection with completely automatic priming. It's got a slide bar priming system. You can see this sliding back and forth here. That's kind of similar to what's on the Hornady Lock and Load AP Progressive Press. And the way that the shell holders are attached is a little bit different too. Let me show that to you. You slide the shell holder in, and then there's this platform that goes over the top and snaps down. So when you put the cartridge in, it's almost like you've got this little platform here. And it's also ambidextrous. You can install the handle on the right-hand side or the left-hand side. It's got really nice features in construction. There's a set of racks and accessories up here. This is a 3-die rack. It's got 2 positions here for case prep tools so that you can do that as a part of your process if you want, and an acro bin holder in case you wanted to have bullets or whatever up next to where you're reloading. Another notable thing about this particular press is the cam over action. So right here I've got iron on iron, and it has this kind of unique camming over. And initially I thought, well, that's kind of odd feeling. But when I looked at the precision numbers for the lock and load iron, it did really, really well in the lineup of presses for things like base to datum line for shoulder setback and base to ogive for bullet seating consistency. So it's a massive press, it's packed with features, and if you want fully automatic priming, the lock and load iron is something to look at. Okay, time to enter the Lee zone, and I'm going to start with the little press that could. This is the Lee Breechlock Challenger. I just checked, so the MSRP on this press is $99. Yesterday, Mid-South had it for $68 on sale. That is not a lot of money. And if you look at my Budget Precision 223 series, where I used the Breechlock Challenger complete reloading kit and a Thompson Center compass chambered in 223 and a budget optic, I had an entire package under $600 and was able to put 5 shots in under 0.3 inches at 100 yards. So it all depends on your budget and your goals. This press has all of the basic functionality that you're going to need and a few extras as well. It's got a 3.75 inch usable frame opening. This is made in the US. It's made from die cast aluminum. Lee has figured out a way to make stuff really cheap and still make it perform pretty well. I mean, it depends on the product you're talking about. Some are favorites and others aren't. Their collet sizer is a favorite. If you're on a budget, this press will get the job done, as I mentioned, with the Budget 223 project being an example thereof. It has some interesting features as well. This breech lock system is kind of like the Hornady lock and load bushing system. It requires a little bit more rotation, and it's kind of more like screw threads in how it works. But you can either attach a bushing to each die and insert and remove it like so, or if you align it just correctly, there's a little cutout here, and you can drop it in and have this button come up which retains the breech lock bushing in the press. So then you don't have to buy bushings for each die, you just screw them in and out, and the bushing does not rotate in the press. It's got on-press priming via a lever. The lever just drops in, and when the depriming happens, it falls through a little hole here down into a square funnel into this tube. You can either let the tube fill up or direct it into a trash can. The action on this is hard stop in that the ram comes up to the top and it just stops. It does have an ambidextrous handle. You can put the handle on the right side or the left side, and you can adjust the length of the handle as well for optimized throw and optimized leverage. Same on the other cast iron, the 50 BMG and the classic cast iron presses. They use the same basic design. Their handles are a little bit beefier, the diameter of the rod here. So a lot of value for a little bit of money. Okay, next I'm going to show you 2 presses that are essentially the same but are part of different kits. This is the Lee Classic cast iron O-frame reloading press. I also have here the Lee 50 BMG reloading kit press, which is also cast iron. The 50 BMG kit comes with all of the parts that you're going to need, like a priming holder and a different top for the ram that's actually removable, which is an integrated shell holder for 50 BMG. The 50 BMG kit comes with the 7/8 by 14 bushing and a standard ram top that accepts standard shell holders as well. So these two are actually kind of the same thing with different configuration options. The Lee Classic cast iron has an MSRP of $190. For a little bit more, you can get the breech lock kit. Actually, sometimes it's offered at the same price. Instead of a 7/8 by 14 bushing, you're going to have that breech lock bushing that's going to accept the same kind of bushings as the breech lock Challenger. The 50 BMG kit is offered as a set with dies, everything you need to load 50 BMG. So again, the classic cast iron, MSRP about $190. I saw sale prices and online prices about $125. The 50 BMG kit has an MSRP of $370 with street prices around $259. So if you want to load 50 BMG and you want to load standard rifle cartridges that are smaller than 50 BMG, I think that 50 BMG kit is a great value. If you want to have a large 4¼ inch usable frame opening and you want a value-oriented heavy-duty construction, I think the Lee Classic cast iron, either in breech lock or standard, is a good option as well. Interesting findings. I thought it would be interesting to run both of these presses through my entire series of tests, even though they are the same thing essentially, because I wanted to use it as kind of a control sample. And when you look at the performance numbers, they ranked a little bit differently, but they were definitely in the same ballpark in terms of the datum length tests and the concentricity tests. So I think that showed, yes, there's some variation in my testing due to some of the variances in brass and just the kind of luck of the draw, but things tended to test pretty consistently. Both of these tested better than the breech lock Challenger. It had a little bit more slop in the ram, and it didn't produce quite as precision-oriented ammunition. But again, acceptable results if you're looking for somewhere around 1/3 of an MOA or 1/4 MOA, that kind of thing. Both of these have the same kind of primer collection tube that you can either direct into a trash can or you can let fill up and empty periodically. Same ambidextrous handle design, a little bit beefier, a little bit longer. These ranked kind of in the middle on the force graphs that you'll see in the detailed write-up. I expected the leverage to be actually a little bit more given that it's a 50 BMG press, but they were kind of in the middle to upper range for that. These also have a hard stop design, and it is a 50 BMG press. So if you take the bushing out, it'll take 1.5" by 12 dies as well. That means you could also put the Hornady lock and load bushing conversion kit in this press, which you can on any of the presses that have a removable bushing that has that 1.5 12 threading on it. So I would say this has a lot of value. I did have a little bit of an issue with one of the castings. I had to file down a rough part of the casting because the bottom isn't really finished. I mean, you have to cut certain areas if you're going to meet this really aggressive low price point. But again, they work well, and it's going to give you the configuration options that you're going to not find on some of the other presses. Let's talk Lyman. I got 2 presses from their new brass smith lineup, which was introduced at about this time last year. This is the Ideal. I'll also show the Victory. Here's the deal with the Ideal. Okay, this is about the best deal that you're going to find on a USA-made cast iron press. It's a C-frame in construction. It's no nonsense. And what this press really shines with is things like bullet seating, because it's got a very short throw. It's very quick to use, but surprisingly, it also fared well in my force tests. The peak sizing force on this press was about in the middle of the pack, which surprised me. With the short handle and short throw, I expected this to have the maximum peak sizing force for that once fired 6.5 Creedmoor brass. Again, this is a straight up press. It's got quality cast iron USA construction. It's got nice linkage. It's got a central handle, so it is therefore ambidextrous in nature. It's very simple and straightforward. The spent primers go right into this spent primer cup, and it's just what you need and nothing more. It uses standard 7/8 by 14 dies like you would expect. It comes in at 10.83 pounds, which is a little bit lower on the scale, but considering its overall size and configuration, it's pretty massive. It's very solid. MSRP of $99.95. I saw it on sale for $82 at Mid-South Shooter Supply. So if you want a piece of gear that's going to last a long time, good simple features, optimized for things like bullet seating or decapping, this would be a great addition to the lineup. The action of the ram is hard stop. It comes up and it just stops abruptly. You can feel that. And I think this is just a good all-around basic option, and it's a really good second press. Okay, stepping from the Ideal up to the Victory, this is a big step up in capacity and weight. This thing weighs twice what the Ideal does, coming in at about 20 pounds, whereas the Ideal comes in at about 10 pounds. This has a 4.71 inch usable capacity compared to the 3.69 inch usable capacity on the Ideal. This press also has manual on press priming. You pull the lever and then a primer is dispensed into the cup. You push the cup in on the way down and then the primer is seated into the case. So what I like about that kind of a priming system is it's pretty much foolproof. It's not going to get jammed. On the downside, it is one more step to keep track of as you're reloading your ammunition. Both of these presses are no float design. There's no float up at the reloading die and there's no float at the shell holder. So depending on what your philosophy is around self-guiding versus rigidly locking things in, these presses are going to be the latter. Again, USA made, massive cast iron construction. This one is ambidextrous, but not with a central handle. Can't do that with the priming system. It's got an offset handle that can be mounted either on the right-hand side or on the left-hand side. Nice, generous length handle. This is a really good all-around press. It's also got the hard stop. It's not a cam over design. MSRP on the Victory is $209.95, and I've seen street prices right around $165, which is a lot of massive value for the dollar. And here we have the MEC Marksman. MEC has only been in the metallic reloading equipment game for a few years, but the MEC Marksman has become popular in that time and for good reason. It's got a lot of great features and some unique capabilities. It is what I would call an open frame, O-frame, C-frame press. I think open frame is probably the best way to describe it. It's a massive USA casting for the frame. It's got a ground and polished ram, and you can really feel that when you cycle the press. This is probably the easiest cycling press that has good ram to press frame fit. Check out the detailed article for more information about those metrics. It's got an integrated tray in the top. It's got that standard 1.5 by 12 threading. I've run it with a lock and load bushing. On the bottom, on the ram, is where you'll find one of the interesting features on the Marksman, and that's its patented floating shell holder design. You can actually see it move side to side. And the idea is kind of like with the Forster Co-Ax or the Frankfort Arsenal Empress, is to allow alignment between the case and the die. And that's exactly what happens. If you look at the performance data that I gathered for this press, it did very well, and I really love how accessible and open things are there on the front. MSRP is $235 as of the filming of this video, and I saw it on sale for about $190 on Mid-South Shooters Supply, which is, I feel like, a great value. This is a press that is familiar to many of you. This is the Rock Chucker Supreme from RCBS. And I'll have to say, right off the get-go, the most notable thing about this press in these tests was that it was basically neck and neck with the expensive German Präzipress in terms of the quality of the ammunition produced. When it came to average datum length, when it came to the standard deviation of those values, and the normalized total indicator reading for case neck concentricity and bullet concentricity, the RCBS Rock Chucker Supreme was right at the top of the list with the Präzipress. USA made, cast iron construction. This has got a 4.12 inch usable frame opening, which is very good. It's got an integrated lever priming system. This is kind of an interesting design. You swing it in place and it can rock back and forth. You insert a primer, you prime, you insert a primer and you prime, or you can just flip it out of the way, which I think is kind of a nice convenience. It's got a bushing at the top threaded for 7/8 by 14, and it uses standard shell holders. And this is one of the things I'm going to have to do more analysis on. Is float a good thing or is float a bad thing in terms of the shell holder, in terms of how the die is secured? This press and the Präzipress, both completely fixed designs. Fixed shell holder, fixed die station. So what does that mean? I think what that means is if you have really good precision in your press, you don't have to have float. If you have float, can it help correct for some circumstances, certain types of dies? I'm going to have to collect more data in order to know that. But this press really, really did well. It's also got a ambidextrous handle mounting arrangement. I've got it mounted on the right here. It's got this unique primer catcher where when the depriming is happening, basically this little hood here catches the primer and then it'll fall either to the left or the right. Now here's the question for you all. Does it matter if I'm up on top of the equator or below it in terms of which side of the earth I'm on? Because mine are all over here on the right side. I will leave that for you to contemplate. If you wanted to switch this over to Hornady lock and load bushing system, you can, because it's got this bushing on the top that's removable that has the 1.5" by 12" threading on it. It's also very attractive. It's got the typical RCBS sort of silver and green speckle finish, which I think is really nice. This press, basically hard to go wrong with. It's a good solid performer. MSRP is $226.61. That's a very exact number. And I saw prices at Mid-South down around $166, which if you're looking for precision ammo is not a bad way to go. Are you ready for something different? Because this is the RCBS Summit, which literally turns the reloading press upside down on itself. That's right. The die moves up and down and the cartridge stays stationary. It kind of takes a little while to get used to, but I'll tell you what, this press got the top score in total indicator reading for bullet concentricity and case neck concentricity. What's interesting about the measurements that I took was that it has some side-to-side float, which I think you can see here, and very little in and out float. I don't know if that had anything to do with those results, but in terms of concentricity, this press was king. And in addition, it's got a really open and accessible format. I mean, you can get your hands all the way around the cartridge here. And uses standard 7/8 by 14 dies. It's got the threaded bushing, and it's entirely above the bench, except for the portion of the handle that comes down below when the die is at the bottom of its stroke. Let's see. MSRP on the Summit is $281.29. I saw a street price at Mid-South Shooter Supply of $199. The weight is 19 pounds, so it's on the heavier side. It's very solid construction, and it does have a cam over design. So the die comes down, then very slightly goes back up. The float, again, is side to side. It's got a Zerk fitting here so that you can grease it. And I think this is totally a notable press because of the design, the performance, and again, I do like the RCBS speckled green and silver paint job. Enter Redding. This is the Redding Big Boss 2. It is another classic cast iron O-frame press. It's made in the USA. It's made to exacting standards. It's got this cool retro green crackle finish, which I particularly like. And I would say I've put more miles on this single stage press than in any of the other single stage presses behind me. I've sized a lot of military 308 with it, and I've put it to a lot of hard use. And when I looked at the press ram to frame fit, this was one of the better presses. It still has tight tolerances even after all that use, and I think that just says this press is put together really well. It's got the standard 7/8 by 14 bushing with 1.5 by 12 on the outside, so you can run a lock and load bushing conversion kit on this press. It uses standard shell holders. It's got 3.75 inch usable frame capacity, weighs in at 15.7 pounds. It is heavy. It's not the heaviest, but it's very solid nonetheless. It's got hard stop actuation rather than cam over. It's got this slide bar priming system where you can pull to dispense a primer, and then on the way down you push it in, you prime, you let it go, and it springs back. I like the way that that works, and it's good to have the option to prime on the press even if you don't always do so. Another thing about this press is it came in second overall on leverage. So it was right behind the Forster Co-Ax. The peak sizing force was just a little bit over 17 pounds. Let's see what that was. It was 17.32 on this one. So very good leverage on it, and with an MSRP of $339.40 and a street price of $204. Again, if you're looking for kind of like a lifetime piece of equipment, that kind of an investment, and you want good precision and a good classic design, check out the Reading Big Boss 2. Well, it came up last alphabetically, and I'll have to say it's kind of the most crazy. It's the most extreme. It's the most nicely machined press. This is the Turban CNC Heavy Präzipress. This is the 120 millimeter model. There's 3 different sizes. This brings precision to a different level. The Turban CNC Präzipress won the overall precision ranking, but I'll have to say the RCBS Rockchecker Supreme was actually very close. This press has a very unique configuration in that it's got a very large central ram with a bushing, and then it's got 3 guide rods, and they each have linear ball bearings that help support this carriage. The carriage is incredibly tight. I think it was 1.5 ten-thousandths of an inch of movement. I mean, we're talking about locked down precision. So this is also the most expensive press, 850 euros, which makes out to about $950. And it's also, even though it's CNC aluminum, a lot of the parts on it, it's the heaviest, 32.26 pounds. This thing is massive. I mean, the handle alone, look at this thing. There's no flex at all in this. And with sizes, this will load 338 Lapua. There's also the large Präzipress, which is the 140 millimeter model. That will load 50 BMG. The 105 millimeter standard Präzipress is for conventionally sized cartridges. There's different bushings that screw in. This is the 7/8 by 14 bushing that was included with the press. And again, the precision was outstanding. And I think really to test this machine fully, I would need better quality dies and potentially neck-turned brass and a bunch of other stuff that I really didn't want to get into for this particular story. But I will be looking for opportunities ongoing if I do some bench rest stories, for instance, to test this, even further to get it really out to its full potential. It has a 4.68 inch usable frame opening, and I mean, it's just the Mercedes of reloading presses. You should see people when they come into the shop and they cycle this thing. It kind of defies description. It's just an amazing experience to use it. I'll just put it at that. It's also got an ambidextrous handle mounting arrangement and a really industrial primer catcher through a stainless tube that drops into a large capacity cup. The Präzipress will not disappoint. But it also is expensive, so you kind of have to decide what's important to you. So there you go, an overview of 14 different single stage reloading presses. I had a lot of fun and it was a lot of work putting this story together. I do want to remind you, click on that first link in the video description. There is a huge article that's going to go into detail and list a lot of the performance metrics, a lot of the specifications, give you pictures of all these presses. There's a lot of information to absorb. But remember, if you want to load precision ammunition, there's multiple tools that can get the job done. It really matters what your personal preferences are, what your budget is, and I hope that this video has been helpful for you to make those decisions. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe with notifications to GavinTube. I got a lot more reloading stuff, shooting stuff, metalworking, tons of cool stories coming up this year. If you want one of these cool Ultimate Reloader t-shirts, you can go to the Ultimate Reloader store. You can support me on Patreon. There's going to be links down in the video description. Until next time, happy shooting and happy reloading.